As a special note, we do have someone on this call who is hard of hearing, so we may be asking people to restate their questions and their answers accordingly. I am Kate Rubicava, the Chief Executive Officer for the Utah Nonprofits Association, and it is an honor to share space and time with each of you today. I'd like to recognize and thank each of the teams at UNA and with Senator Lee's office for everyone's hard work in getting the details of this listening session put together. Also, from my home, I'd like to acknowledge the unceded lands of the Goshute, Shoshone, and Ute peoples and the continued existence and contributions of Indigenous people who have lived on and cared for this land for thousands of years. The Utah Nonprofits Association supports the nonprofit sector by providing access to resources and best practices. We engage in state and federal policy to assure that the nonprofit sector is adequately represented. We also provide cost-saving benefits so that the budgets of nonprofits are positively impacted by engaging with us. Our mission to unify, strengthen, and elevate nonprofits in Utah is powerful, and it simply boils down to this. We are good people doing good work for good causes. This conversation about the expansion of the federal charitable deduction is really important, and it's an example of public policy in action. Engaging with our elected officials and providing feedback is really only one piece of a puzzle. UNA encourages engagement and connection with all of our and your elected officials. To that end, UNA is hosting 2 upcoming sessions. One is on June 16th, where we'll be outlining how public policy impacts your nonprofit. And the second one is on June 23rd. It is a listening session with State Representative Mike Winder. Our training and events calendar has more details on these and other sessions that you can tune into at utahnonprofits.org. I really want to thank Senator Lee for partnering with UNA to host this important discussion on the expansion of the charitable deduction. Representing the state of Utah as our senator, he is the chairman of the Joint Economic Committee and also serves on the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, and the Committee on the Judiciary. He is a tireless advocate for our founding constitutional principles and is helping the nonprofit sector with the expansion of the charitable deduction. And hopefully we're going to be able to get this across the finish line. So the time is now yours, Senator Lee.
Thanks so much, Kate. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Thanks for your interest in this issue. Thank you especially for all you do that really forms the backbone of our society, of our culture, our civilization. My friend and colleague James Langford likes to point out that there really are 3 separate social safety nets in our society. And they occur at 3 different levels. The first level is the family. And the second level consists of really where the bulk of the work is done, which is with nonprofits. And then the third level is with the government. Neither families nor the government can handle this entire burden on their own because most of the most important work for safety nets, for making the world a better place in which to live, for bringing people together, really can be found at the nonprofit level. I want to introduce this topic tonight by talking about something that you may not connect immediately with Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code or with charitable contributions, but you look at the trying circumstances in which we find ourselves right now as a society. You look at how social fabric is coming apart as a result of some very deeply rooted, deep-seated feelings about government and the use of coercive force and the extent to which it's abused. Reminds me of one of my favorite areas of legislative reform, which involves criminal justice. It's been something that I've worked on for the better part of a decade, basically the entire time I've been in the United States Senate, is criminal justice reform. And about a year and a half ago, after 8 years of laborious effort, I helped shepherd through the biggest criminal justice reform that we've seen in this country in an entire generation. What does this have to do with nonprofits or with the charitable contribution discussion? Well, it has a lot to do with it. I want to cite an example of one local nonprofit, one who's got some representatives participating on our call tonight. The Other Side Academy is an example of how a nonprofit can solve something that society has long considered unsolvable. For many years, as I've been working with criminal justice reform, we've been toying with the vexing, trying problem of how to reduce recidivism, how to reduce the rate at which offenders, after they've been released from prison, recommit an offense. Incarcerating someone necessarily involves an infringement of their life, of their liberty, of their property. It intrudes into the family structure, into community structure. It takes away somebody's husband or father or son or nephew or brother or mom or aunt or daughter, sometimes for years or even decades at a time. And it does so in a way that's very disruptive to society. The rub has long been, yeah, but how do you deter crime? How do you make it less likely that someone will engage in criminal behavior after they've been released from prison? And isn't that going to be a problem if we reduce mandatory minimum prison sentences? The Other Side Academy is a great example of how a nonprofit can take a vexing problem like this one that government has for a very long time tried to solve, but been largely unable to do so, and has solved it. Whenever I've visited the Other Side Academy, I've been astounded by the success rate that they have. This is an organization that, for those of you who are familiar with it, will know provides an educational and residence training program for people who are looking to make a change in their lives, including many people who would otherwise be incarcerated, often for drug offenses, and who want to change the way they go about things. I'm aware of no other program, not within government, not outside of government, that has a success rate in bringing down to basically zero the recidivism rate of those who participate in it. It's the type of experimentation that cannot occur effectively within government. Fortunately, in this circumstance, we've got judges in our criminal justice systems who have been able to cooperate with it, who have been able to divert some people from the prison system into the Other Side Academy. I was about to say, or into something like it, but there's almost nothing like the Other Side Academy. But they've done this through innovative techniques that have been shown to work. It's exactly the kind of solution we need right now in response to the tragic and senseless murder of George Floyd. We need as many ideas around this problem as possible. Very often, ideas in response to problems like this one cannot be found exclusively within government. They're not going to be found outside of the nonprofit community. It's one of the reasons why right now we especially need the nonprofit community, and why I'm pushing to extend, not only preserve and protect, but extend and expand the charitable contribution deduction. I want to make it deductible above the line indefinitely, ideally, but for our current purposes right now, we've cobbled together a very good bipartisan group of senators who on a bipartisan basis are advocating making it deductible above the line up to and including 1/3 of the standard deduction. We think this is especially important right now for a couple of reasons. Number one, as we're recovering and people are trying to get back to work following COVID-19, we need people who can bring together communities more than ever. Number two, those same organizations, including probably most or all of you who operate in the nonprofit space, there's not a chance that most or all of you are not experiencing a significant revenue shortfall because of the fact that when when we go into a crisis mode as a society, one of the casualties often ends up being charitable contributions. We need to jumpstart that back again. Passing this right now would be helpful. Number three, in the wake of the George Floyd killing and the discontent that this has caused around the country, the civil unrest that it's causing, we need all eyes on problems like these, and anything that can be a reminder of how people can come together can be helpful. This is the reason why tomorrow, as the chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, I'm holding a hearing specifically on this topic to explain why it is that we need to expand the charitable contribution deduction and make it above the line, and what the societal benefits could be, including and especially the benefits directly to the nonprofit community in our country. But we especially need to do this right now because of all the things that we're struggling with. And this is where we expand and where we protect that second and most important pillar from within our social safety net, which is the nonprofit community. So with that, I'd love to open up the floor to questions and talk about whatever is on your mind on this or any other issue.
Thank you so much, Senator Lee. We've had a couple of questions come in chat, and I'd like to be able to allow for them to ask their questions. And the first person I'm going to call on, Chandra, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, or I can also ask your question if you would prefer, and just let us know where you're from as well.
Thank you so much, UNA, and also Senator Lee and your office for hosting this call. Yeah, I'm happy to ask the question. My name is Chandra. I'm the Executive Director of Art Access, which is an art and disability organization located in Salt Lake City. One thing that I wanted to ask is, so we're a smaller nonprofit, and most of our donors are kind of more like smaller to mid-sized donors, and myself included, that I would kind of identify as that kind of donor with Art Access and then also with other charitable organizations. But for me and these other donors, we never get to claim the deductions on our taxes because the standard deduction is always going to be the best option for us. And so I was wondering, Senator Lee, if you'll be advocating for this to be a permanent expansion beyond just this year, even though yes, it is so wonderful and will be really important for helping nonprofits get through this pandemic, but I also think that there's a lot of benefit far beyond just this year as well. Thank you.
Chandra, thanks for asking that question and for all you do. Yeah, the short answer to the question is yes, I do. That's what we want to do. Now, the bill that I'm talking about right now would create an above-the-line deduction for 2019 and 2020. Now, keep in mind, in order to get the 2019 part done, we've got to get it done very, very quickly because the filing deadline for that has been pushed back to July 15th. If we got that done right now, it would make a big difference because people could make the contribution for the previous year and get credit for it as they file their 2019 taxes. I think it's the best way to jumpstart charitable contributions in this country at a time when they're desperately needed, but frankly, in many quarters are really hurting. And the best way to jumpstart innovation is by allowing for that. So what we want to do with this bill is to create the above-the-line deduction for 2019 and 2020. We're interested in making that permanent. And that's where I intend to get with this. We decided that the best strategy for that, as part of this bipartisan coalition of senators, was to start with 2019 to 2020 for both of those years with this bill, and then work on making it permanent afterwards. Even before the coronavirus began spreading in the United States, we were having a lot of good bipartisan discussions about how to make permanent the above-the-line deduction, and we were making good progress on that. But once we make the above-the-line deduction more robust than what we got, we achieved a partial victory a couple months ago with the CARES Act, with the $300 that was included in the CARES Act to deal with the emergency up front. So this next step involves acting for purposes of tax years 2019 and 2020, and then we'll pick up where we left off finding a way to make this permanent and larger. We've been very upfront about this with each other and with our other colleagues, pointing out that what we are trying to do is to create the camel's nose inside the tent. We got the camel's nose inside the tent with the CARES Act. This is another big step forward. We're going to get the sort of the camel's whole head. If we can get this thing done for 2019 and 2020, that's going to have the front torso of the camel, and we'll be well on our way.
Thank you, Senator Lee.
Thank you.
And now I would like to thank you both. I would also like to open up the opportunity for Eric Marx to ask a question as well. Eric?
Thanks, Brandy. And thank you, Senator, very much for your leadership on this. It's near and dear to all of our hearts on this call. The tax code is such a beast that a lot of times the law of unintended consequences, seems to bite you every time you try to address anything. The increase, the $12,000 a year for couples and individuals of the standard deduction was supposed to be a great thing, and the unintended consequences, it makes charitable giving, less deductible for a vast swath of taxpayers. So, with humility that this may have more unintended consequences, I ask whether this suggestion might have some legs, and that is to allow folks to make a contribution from their 401ks or from their IRAs without paying any tax, ordinary income tax for taking it out, or a penalty if they're younger. There are a lot of older folks who are in retirement who now the 12 and the 24,000 standard deduction puts charitable contributions out of reach because they're no longer working and earning an income that's subject to tax, but they have wealth. And to be able to tap into that wealth and be generous to the community and not pay a tax on the way out of the account when you can't deduct it when you give it to a charity seems like a kind of a no-brainer way to get the money directly out of the wealth account into the local charities. Again, notwithstanding unintended consequences, is that something you've come across or considered?
Eric, I'm glad you brought that up. I just took out my note card, made a note of that. I think that's a good idea to explore for the reasons you've mentioned. Because I think there are some taxpayers who might be in a good position to do it if they could use a 401k plan to do it without taking the penalty. The only downside to that I can think of, so it's going to have a score attached to it. The Joint Tax Committee would end up scoring that, but I think we could minimize the cost.
Well,
I think that's a net gain.
The money would stay in the account anyhow, unless it was, forced out for minimums. So
Right.
It probably isn't treated as a revenue source for scoring currently, I'm guessing.
No, you're right. You're right.
So food for thought, just something to.
I guess one could argue that down the road, if it weren't given for that purpose, it would be taxed at ordinary income levels. Yeah, you're onto something. I think this is a good idea. Okay, so I've got John and Christian and Brecken on the phone. They advised me on these issues. I'm making a note to each of them. Let's talk about this. John or Christian, do you have any immediate reaction to it?
There's some legislation considering some of it. Oh, it's Christian?
Yeah, this is Christian. Hi, sir. So thank you so much for the question. So they beat us to this by about 3 days. This is actually one of the issues that we wanted to talk about in the next ledge meeting. There's some legislation that includes this among other provisions. This is something that we wanted to recommend that you consider. And I think, there are, of course, always these tax code implementation details. But I think this is definitely something we should be talking about.
Now, Christian, did you in fact beg Eric Marx or bribe him in any way to raise this question so as to make that easier?
I believe I don't have to answer that question, sir,
Okay.
but I'll leave it to Eric.
Fair enough.
He did. He transferred money out of his 401k into my checking account.
Excellent. Brilliant. Nailed it.
Well, it sounds like we just started a whole new conversation there. Thank you so much, Eric and Senator Lee and your staff for hearing that idea. I would like to now ask Clint Qadam to ask his question. And Clint, if you wouldn't mind when you introduce yourself, if you wouldn't just let us know where you're from as well.
Sure. So I'm Clint Qadam. I'm the executive director at Community Action Partnership of Utah. So I work with a lot of the community action agencies in the state. And I was curious whether the in-kind donations would continue to be included in above the line deduction as well. Because I think that's one of the situations that I've seen is, you know, some of the agencies have really appreciated canned food donations when their food banks kind of ran a little dry, or, you know, they needed some extra personal protection, PPE, and they needed cleaning supplies that sometimes weren't available, even if funds were there. I'm just curious if those in-kinds are going to be continued to be emphasized as well.
Yes, they will be. And that's an important part of all of this. While cash donations are still far more common, there are a lot of people who make in-kind donations, and it's important for them to receive the same favorable tax treatment, and they would be under what I'm proposing.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. I am going to move to our pre-submitted questions. If anybody else has any other questions that come up as we move through these discussion topics, please let me know and we can jump in. The next question that I have for you, Senator Lee, what can the nonprofits on this call do to keep the ball rolling to support the efforts of you and your bipartisan colleagues regarding the universal charitable deduction? Part two to that is, how can regular Utahns, maybe they're not working at a nonprofit, but how can regular Utahns support this work and the efforts that you're making or that you're doing to make it happen?
I'm glad you asked that, because I need all the help I can get with this. So the short answer to the question is, I need you to help me. Anyone of you who might agree with me on this, I want to invite you to help me build support for this in Congress. Now, it's tough to do, but I can talk to you a little bit about how to do it. First and foremost, let your elected officials know why it's important to you. You're already talking to me, and if you're on this call, I think chances are pretty high that you probably agree with me on this. But I need your help in getting Mitt Romney as excited about this as I am. I don't necessarily think it will be a challenge to get him, but he's not. He has yet to speak to weigh in publicly on it. And please speak to your member of Congress as well. And then engage other nonprofits that you know, both in Utah and in other states. That's really where the magic happens. I find that a lot of nonprofits are part of networks. In some cases, you might be part of a formal organization that is itself national. In other cases, you might just have counterparts in other parts of the country, in other states, that do something similar to what you do. Try to get them going as well and have them talk to their members of Congress. Tell your colleagues and your counterparts about what we're trying to accomplish and what it would mean for them, what it would mean for you, what it would mean for each of their communities. Try to engage people who support and benefit from the great work that you do. So we can leverage a lot of this if the messaging being done isn't just from nonprofits, but it's also from those who benefit from them, which is basically everybody. It's just different nonprofits have different people who benefit directly from what they do. That's an important point to continue to emphasize, is that this legislation doesn't just help nonprofits. It helps all the people who believe in what they do. Helps all the people who are the intended beneficiaries of them. So this makes a really big difference. You hear about the butterfly effect. It's been discussed so much now that it's almost a cliche, but that the pattern of butterflies migrating and flapping their wings in South America can end up impacting the weather in Florida. There is no doubt that the combined efforts of charitable organizations, of nonprofits throughout the country, and those who benefit from them can have a huge impact on Congress. This is a bill that is neither Republican nor Democratic, it's neither liberal nor conservative in its politically facing dynamic. It doesn't have a natural politicized charge to it. And as a result of that, it doesn't have any natural enemies. It has no natural predators. So we want it to be able to grow and blossom, and you'll be a big part of helping that happen.
Thank you so much. I have a follow-up question because there was a pre-submitted question. So does Senator Romney support this? He hasn't expressly stated his support of the work or of what you're doing right now.
That's right. To my knowledge, he's never publicly discussed it, and I haven't had a chance to talk to him about this bill. Our focus up until this point has been negotiating the details of the bill with the other 5 senators in this bipartisan coalition. But we're now to a critical stage of that, and I've been working with Senator Lankford and Senator Shaheen and Senator Coons and a handful of other Republicans and Democrats. Senator Lankford is poised now to formally introduce the bill. He's going to be the lead sponsor, and I think the lead Democratic co-sponsor is going to be Senator Coons, but Senator Shaheen will also be on there. My understanding, based on my most recent conversation with Senator Lankford, is that he's going to be introducing it sometime this week. And as soon as he does that, I'm going to approach Mitt, and we hope and expect to have his support. But any of you who have occasion to talk to him can help me out in that effort.
I was just going to say, I hear an action item coming from this to reach out to our representative. And I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, and this is the second part question that I'm seeing in the chat and whatnot. Do you have, I heard something about this week putting out a bill. Can you give us some idea on when this will be voted on? What time frame are you looking at?
Yeah. Okay, so a couple of things are going to happen this week. One of them is going to be tomorrow. I'll be convening the Joint Economic Committee. I'm the chairman of the Joint Economic Committee. We've got a number of committees in Congress. Most of them are either Senate committees or House committees. We've got a small handful of them that are both House and Senate. And one of them is called the Joint Economic Committee. We look at we're basically an in-house think tank within Congress. And it's a great laboratory for bipartisan cooperation, because we focus on ideas and things that we can measure, and we try to figure out how we can come up with legislative ideas that will help benefit everyone. So we're having a hearing specifically on this issue tomorrow. I'm having Senators Lankford and Shaheen testify in connection with that. In addition to our other panel of witnesses, this is going to be a fantastic opportunity. And then sometime within about 24 hours of that hearing, so sometime probably either tomorrow, Wednesday, or Thursday at the latest, Senator Lankford will introduce the bill. At that point, we'll be able to take on more co-sponsors. In a bill like this one, we like to try to keep the co-sponsors more or less paired. We're going to try to add one Democrat for every Republican we add, and vice versa, so that it doesn't become lopsided on either side of the aisle. Then our hope is that this gains momentum, and that we're able to attach this to any phase 4 legislation that might be passed by Congress in connection with the coronavirus. Now, there's some speculation about whether there's going to be a phase 4. That is the best vehicle that we can attach it to right now. And as far as I know, it may well happen. So we're preparing to attach it to that. We can't attach it to that. We're going to find another must-pass vehicle. If there is a phase 4, the phase 4 is going to vest or fail to vest within the next 6 weeks or so. And so that's why this thing is going to be moving fairly quickly, or so we hope. If the phase 4 plan doesn't materialize somehow, if that evaporates, there are other vehicles we will look to put it on this year, but it wouldn't necessarily be in the July or the June and July time horizon. We do want to get this done as quickly as possible, because I think in order to maximize on the benefit to you, to the nonprofit community, it's going to be very helpful to get 2019 and 2020 in there. And like I say, in order for this to count toward 2019, we've got to get it done within a few weeks. We don't have much more time, given that the filing deadline for 2019, 2019's tax year is July 15th.
And I'm getting a question from one of our members. Do you know what the bill number is?
I don't, because it hasn't been filed yet. It won't be assigned a bill number until after it's filed.
Okay.
But we should know that sometime between now and Thursday.
Okay. So some of the other questions that have been coming up around this in particular is we would love to know what your opinion is of the likelihood of this all being passed through, and if there will be any, I'm not quite sure how else to say this, but riders on the bill, additional things that will be put back, what other costs will be. We'd just love to hear some of your thoughts around that.
Yeah. Okay, so let me say up front, the legislative process can be unpredictable. And that's sort of an understatement. But there are lots of chances for surprises here. Now, some have raised concerns that some taxpayers might claim deductions for charitable donations that they didn't really make. In other words, that they might commit tax fraud out of it. We're not aware of any evidence that current safeguards for claiming the charitable contribution deduction are inadequate. As far as we know, the current protections work, but you know, we're going to be prepared to be in a position to negotiate some further safeguards for dealing with fraud in order to get the bill passed if that comes up. We've got lots of cards up our sleeve on that, and we've got ways of dealing with that. Our coalition is very much prepared to push this policy as a standalone bill because it's good policy, and we're very much on board with it. But we're also open to the possibility of including it, like I said a moment ago, as a provision of the potential phase 4 COVID-19 relief package. It is, I want to make clear that although we're going to push in both directions, it's very, very hard these days to get something passed as a standalone bill. There's kind of two tracks that it can take. If you get something that nobody really objects to, you can get a standalone bill passed if you can somehow get unanimous support for it. This happens more often than you might realize. That the Senate passes stuff on a very routine basis. It's done unanimously. Ordinarily, a change like this to the tax code would not occur by unanimous consent. And if it doesn't occur by unanimous consent, it's almost inevitable that it'll be subject to a process whereby it'll be paired with something else, or even more likely attached to a much larger package.
Thank you. And I'm going to just continue to go through the questions as we're getting them. Will this shift support of nonprofits from government to private individuals? Do you expect federal funding cuts to balance this?
No, I don't. You know, they deal, government funding and contributions for charitable organizations serve different purposes. And there are a lot of things that nonprofits can do. I would add to that most things. Most things outside of what we all know to be a government program, the government isn't well equipped to handle anyway. In fact, I tend to believe that this would end up resulting in more contributions overall to nonprofits rather than fewer. The nature of charitable contributions in general is such that it tends to be a more effective, efficient way of spending things, and people can see the difference that they're making more readily with a charitable contribution than they can with a very large government program, where you can't always measure the success. Charitable organizations are more than accustomed through their donor base of showing results. And I think that's going to play to your benefit here. And it's not going to result in diminished donation patterns to charitable contributions or to government programs for that matter.
We have another great question coming in. I think as people are hearing you, their brain, we're just all so thoughtful. And it's looking here, do you anticipate any changes to 990 filings as a result of this legislation?
I'm going to need to call on John and Christian to help me with that one. John and Christian, what do you guys think about that?
I'm gonna have to look that up, sir.
Yeah, we could what's that form do?
Yeah, let's pretend one of us doesn't know what a 990 filing is.
Clint, would you like to jump in here?
Sure. Sorry for taking up too much time. It's the filing that nonprofits will file with the IRS on an annual basis, telling about who our donors, major donors were, some of our outcomes, things that the IRS will need to maintain our 501c3 status. I just wonder in the process if you have people that write in, if there's going to be additional benefits to nonprofits, if somebody will want more accountability measures, if somebody would possibly make the 990 a little bit more intense or different. I don't know.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I understand the instinct behind the question. We certainly wouldn't want it to have that impact. It would be bad if they started getting more aggressive in the way they required charitable entities to report to the government. So the short answer to your question is no, I don't think so. And there are some things we can do to weed out fraud in this, some tricks we've got up our sleeve to add into it if we have to. To my knowledge, none of them would put the burden on the charitable organization by requiring additional filings or an additional burden there. Yeah, I'm worried about a number of things with this bill. I don't think that's one of them. I think we're going to be okay on that front.
Thank you so much.
I do have one coming in right now. It looks like it's from John Moran. And John is asking, could tuition for nonprofit educational institutions participate up to the 1/3? Oh, I'm so sorry. John is asking me to ask this question. Could tuition for nonprofit educational institutions participate up to the 1/3 limit? And in case there is any clarifying points needed for this question, John, if you can either chat them to me or go ahead and just jump on the line and speak.
Okay, so if the question is whether a charitable contribution to an educational institution, higher ed or otherwise, would qualify, yes. I mean, if it's a charitable contribution to a 501c3, then the answer is yes. I don't know whether
I think I might have a better understanding, and I think, and John, if this is incorrect, you can jump in at any time. It's paying for the tuition for children or others to participate in educational institutions, and that's not a charitable donation. That's paying for services.
Yeah, that would not be covered by this. Now, that is an interesting thought. It's not part of this plan.
Thank you. Looking here, we're kind of coming down to the end of our question time together. And one of the things that did come up in our pre-submission of questions is that Utah has a reputation and culture of giving, especially within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With many of our community members giving to their faith, will there be additional incentives from the expansion of the charitable deductions for Utahns to give to other charitable nonprofits?
Yeah, I think so. Look, for those individuals who are paying tithing, or what you're describing, for those people who are paying tithing and whose tithe and whose total contributions already happen to exceed 1/3 of the standard deduction. So that would be individuals who give less than $4,000, or families, the married couple filing jointly, giving less than $8,000. They unfortunately would not under this legislation, get a larger deduction for anything in addition to that they give to charity. However, they could, and we expect that many will, choose to use the money that they save on their tax bill to give more to other nonprofits. And as we look to making above the line deduction permanent, one of the priorities would be to find ways to raise that cap. And as you mentioned earlier, Brandy, I think it was you who mentioned it. This is one of the, no, maybe it was Clint. Anyway, no, maybe it was Eric. I don't remember who raised it, but somebody raised the point that there are unintended consequences. When we raise the standard deduction, we do so in order to help people, but this ends up having a perverse set of, or an unfortunate set of side effects. And so, yeah, but the bottom line is there are some people who wouldn't benefit directly from it, but it's one of the reasons why we want to get the camel's nose that much farther into the tent. I don't think this is going to harm anyone in Utah, and it's going to benefit many. And the other thing that we know about the economy is that individuals within our economy are not always static. Someone whose income and charitable contribution pattern might be down here today, in a few years might be up here. So if we get the trend going in the right direction and we make these changes so as to expand the contribution, in time, more people, including some people who are not going to benefit from it today, will benefit from it later. And in the meantime, all charitable organizations and those who are served by them will benefit.
Thank you. And we have one final question before we turn our time over to Kate and yourself for your closing remarks. And I just want to say thank you so much for going through this gambit with us. So the president has shared his distrust of nonprofits. Are you working to gain his support so that he does not veto it if passed?
Yes. The president sometimes says things that don't necessarily signal what he will end up doing with a veto. It would surprise me that if he were to take any step in that direction. There are a number of us who are working on this who have had a number of good conversations with him on a number of topics. And knowing him as I do, I would not think that he would veto this. The comments that he's made about charitable contributions tend not to be dismissive of the value that charitable organizations provide. And so I strongly suspect he would recognize, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that he understands the tremendous benefit that this would provide to society as a whole. So I'll put this one in the same category as the risk of a requirement of providing additional paperwork a few minutes ago. There are a lot of things that worry me in connection with this legislation, a lot of things that could stall it out or make it harder for us to get there. I would put this one pretty far down on the list. If we get to the point where it's going to the president's desk, I will be very pleased with that outcome because I will be very confident in that moment. We'll be able to convince him not to veto anything. I don't think it will be difficult at all, in fact. So the good news is we're going to win this. We've got all the resources necessary in order to win the fight. We just don't know exactly what the timing will be. And I say that broadly. I don't want to signal that I am certain that it's going to pass out of Congress and be signed into law this year. I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen sooner rather than later, and to get this legislation passed this year. But this is the right policy. And there's one thing that, there's a statement that's been attributed to Winston Churchill I don't know whether he actually said it, but it's been widely attributed to him. I hope he said it because it's awesome. He said the American people can always be counted on to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other alternative. I don't think Mr. Churchill necessarily intended that as a compliment to the American people, but I take it as such because it's one of the things that differentiates us from many other nations. And this is an example of something that is the right policy. And yeah, look, you've got my word. I'm not going to let Trump veto this.
Well, we're recording, so that's permanent now. No, thank you so much. This has been an incredibly useful and insightful conversation, and we appreciate you running through the halls of the Capitol building with your mask on to get here to speak with us. And I would like to be able to turn the time over now to Kate. And Kate?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandy. And thank you, Senator Lee, for all of your contributions to make this possible. Like you, I am incredibly hopeful that we're going to be able to take this across the finish line and see the expansion of charitable, the charitable deduction. It's, you know, as results-based organizations, we know our value and our worth, and it's incredibly important to us to have you reflect that back to us as well, to let us know that you see it also, because so much of the work that we do in our communities impacts our neighbors, the people living you know, within our own communities. Last week, we had this national call hosted by lots of national organizations in conjunction with the National Council of Nonprofits, and you were on there as well. And we talked about getting a call to action for this work. And Sylvia Acevedo said something amazing. I believe it was she at any point said that a really good hashtag to use is relief for charities. Relief, number 4, charities. So as we work to get this across the finish line, you can count on the UNA paying attention to that schedule so that we can get it out to everybody, so that we can work on Senator Romney, and so that we can work on other members of Congress that we know, so that we can make sure that we get a full bipartisan support in the expansion of charitable deduction. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that, Kate, and thanks for, I really think that's a great message. Relief, number 4, charities. It's concise, and nobody's going to oppose that. Thanks again for letting me come on. This is fantastic. As I think I mentioned during our call last week, whenever I think about this topic, I'm often reminded of this great quote from Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln used this line in his 1861 address to Congress, in which he described the purpose of government, in which he said the purpose of government is to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear the paths of laudable pursuit for all, to afford all a fair start and a fair chance in the race of life. And you know, the artificial weights from shoulders and the obstacles in the path of laudable pursuit that have to be cleared. Sometimes those burdens and those obstacles are placed in there by government itself. Our tax code is a monster. As Eric mentioned a few minutes ago, it's huge. It's unwieldy. 100 years ago, the whole thing was only a few hundred pages long. Today, it's many tens of thousands of pages long. If you add all the private letter rulings and everything to it, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of pages. And the complexity of it itself is a problem. But this is one of the obstacles that we can relieve, one of the weights that we can lift. And I'm so grateful to each of you, and to I think about my friend Bill Holterstrom, who I've known since I was, hey Bill, since I was a teenager. Bill has always been an example to me of someone who loves his community and loves his fellow beings and wants to serve them. And we've got the other Bill Bill Krim coming out to testify in our Joint Economic Committee hearing tomorrow. Next time, I think we need to have both of the United Way of bills testifying for our bill. In any event, thanks so much for all of what you do and for making our state and our world a better place in which to live. Together, we can get this done. We can provide relief for charities, but I need your help. And so thank you so much for your willingness to listen to me today. Take care.
Thank you.